I've been a truck driver for over a decade. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work. I've hauled everything from frozen food to furniture, and the roads become as familiar as the back of my hand. My name's Dan, and I'm 42. Divorced, no kids, just me and my rig, a 2012 Peterbilt I call the Mule. Most nights it's just the hum of the engine and the glow of the dashboard keeping me company. That night started like any other. I'd picked up a load of electronics in Memphis, bound for a warehouse in Albuquerque. It was a long haul, but I liked driving at night. Less traffic, more peace. The dispatcher warned about storms along the route, but I'd driven through worse. My plan was simple. Hit the road, find a rest stop around 2 a.m., and call it a night. By midnight, I was cruising through a stretch of New Mexico desert. The sky was moonless, and the only light came from my headlights, cutting through the inky black. The highway was empty, except for the occasional tumbleweed bouncing across the road. The quiet was comforting, even lulling, until I saw it, a figure standing on the shoulder. At first I thought it was a hitchhiker. They were waving, trying to flag me down. My gut told me to keep driving. It's an unspoken rule among truckers. Don't pick up strangers, especially at night. But something about the way they waved, frantic and desperate, made me hesitate. As I passed, my headlights lit them up. A woman, mid-30s, wearing a jacket too thin for the cold desert night. She wasn't just waving, she was shouting, her face pale and twisted with fear. For a split second, I met her eyes in the mirror. She looked terrified. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. By the time she reached my truck, she was out of breath, her voice shaking. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you. My car broke down. There's something out there. Please, just take me to the next town." She didn't wait for me to agree before climbing into the passenger seat. Her hands were trembling as she buckled up. I glanced at her, trying to gauge if she was dangerous, but she looked harmless, just scared out of her mind. "What's your name?" I asked, easing back onto the highway. "Jessica," she said, staring out the window like she expected something to leap out of the darkness. "All right, Jessica, where's your car?" "A couple of miles back," she muttered. I thought I could make it to the rest stop, but something was following me. "Following you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like a car?" She shook her head. "Number on foot." I don't know what it was. I tried to laugh it off. "Coyotes, maybe. They're all over out here." "It wasn't a coyote," she snapped, her voice sharp. "It was bigger, and it had eyes." I didn't press her. People get jumpy in the dark, imagining things. But her fear was contagious. I found myself glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. We drove in silence for a while. The highway stretched on, empty and endless. I kept expecting to see the glow of a rest stop or a diner, but there was nothing, just mile marker after mile marker, ticking by like a metronome. The longer we drove, the more unsettled I felt. The GPS said we should have hit a service area by now, but the road just kept going. Jessica spoke up, breaking the quiet. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" She turned toward me, her face pale. "That tapping." I turned down the radio and listened. At first, I heard nothing but the rumble of the engine. Then faintly I caught it, a rhythmic tapping like fingernails drumming on glass. "It's probably a loose strap," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'll pull over and check." "No!" Jessica grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't stop." I froze. Her panic was raw, visceral. "All right," I said slowly. "We'll keep going." The tapping grew louder. It wasn't coming from the trailer, it was coming from above. My heart raced as I realized something was on the roof of the cab. Jessica clutched her seatbelt, her eyes darting to the ceiling. "It's here," she whispered. It followed me. I wanted to tell her she was crazy, that it was just the wind or a branch, but the weight pressing down on the cab felt too real. Whatever was up there was heavy. Suddenly there was a sharp bang on the windshield. I swerved, nearly losing control. Something slid down the glass. A smear of shadow, too quick to make out. Then it was gone, swallowed by the night. Did you see that? Jessica's voice was barely audible. I nodded, my hands white-knuckling the wheel. Yeah. We didn't talk after that. The air inside the cab was suffocating, thick with unspoken fear. Every shadow on the road seemed alive, every sound amplified. The GPS still insisted a rest stop was only a mile away. But the road stretched on endlessly, like we were trapped in some liminal space. When the lights finally appeared on the horizon, it felt like a mirage. A gas station, flickering and dim, but real. I pulled in, my hands shaking as I killed the engine. Stay here, I told Jessica. I'll check it out. She didn't argue. Her face was ghostly, her eyes fixed on the windshield as if expecting that thing to reappear. The gas station was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows across the cracked pavement. I stepped inside, expecting to find a clerk, or at least some sign of life. But it was empty. Rows of snacks and drinks sat untouched, the air stale. Hello? I called out. My voice echoed, unanswered. A door creaked behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just a faint breeze ruffling the edge of a help wanted sign taped to the counter. Something about the place felt wrong, like it had been abandoned in a hurry, but everything was too neat, too pristine. I grabbed a bottle of water and headed back to the truck. Jessica was gone. The passenger door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. Her jacket lay crumpled on the seat, but there was no sign of her. I called her name, my voice cracking, but the only answer was the low howl of the desert wind. Panic set in. I searched the lot, the edges of the highway, even inside the gas station again, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. The tapping started again, soft, insistent, coming from inside the cab. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. There, in the passenger seat, was a handprint, not Jessica's. This one was too large, the fingers too long, the outline smeared like it had pressed against the glass from the inside. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until dawn, not stopping until I reached Albuquerque. The dispatcher chewed me out for being late, but I didn't care. I quit that day, sold the truck. Haven't been behind the wheel since. Sometimes late at night I hear it again. The tapping. Always faint. Always just on the edge of hearing. I've moved 3 times, but it doesn't matter. Whatever followed me that night in the desert isn't done with me yet. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years. Long hauls, short runs, through rain, snow, and suffocating summer heat. I've seen it all. Or at least I thought I had. My name's Tom, and I'm not one for tall tales. But something happened last week that I can't shake. If you've got the time, I'll tell you. Maybe then, I'll sleep again. It started like any other night. I'd picked up a load in Boise, heading for Denver, and my route took me down an endless stretch of highway that might as well have been carved into the middle of nowhere. The radio was crackling static, no towns in sight, and just me and my rig slicing through the darkness. The kind of road where the white lines blur into one if you stare too long. The thing is, I like driving at night. Fewer cars, cooler air, and there's a certain peace in it. I guess that's why I didn't think much when I saw the first sign. Mile marker 237. It was battered, leaning, like it had seen better days. But I noticed it because I just passed mile marker 212, maybe 20 minutes earlier. That didn't make sense. I shook it off. Figured I was tired or miscounted. By the time I passed it a second time, I couldn't ignore it. Same sign, same bent angle, same rust streaks like dried blood down its side. Mile marker 237. My pulse kicked up a notch, but I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the highway looped, though that didn't fit with my GPS. Still, I shrugged it off. Roads play tricks on you when you're alone too long. But the third time, I slowed the truck, scanning the shoulder with my high beams. Nothing out there but scrub grass and shadows. I pulled over, killed the engine and got out, letting the stillness press against my ears. It was too quiet. No wind, no distant chirp of crickets, just the heavy weight of silence. I climbed back in, slammed the door harder than I needed to, and got moving. That's when the static on the radio cut out. "Need a lift?" I nearly swerved off the road. The voice was low and calm, but it felt like it was coming from inside the cab, not the radio. My hands clenched the wheel so tight my knuckles popped. "Who's there?" My own voice sounded small in the emptiness. Silence. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. Just the dim glow of my trailer lights stretching behind me. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe I'd been awake too long, a micro nap creeping in. But then the GPS flickered, the screen dimming before brightening again. The route had reset, now pointing me back the way I came, toward mile marker 237. For the first time in years, I was scared. Not the heart-pounding kind of fear, but the slow, creeping dread that crawls under your skin. I kept driving, jaw clenched, ignoring the GPS and fighting the urge to look at the mirrors again. The radio stayed silent, and the darkness outside felt heavier, pressing against the windshield like it wanted in. Then I saw him. A man, standing on the shoulder, illuminated in my headlights. He wasn't waving, wasn't doing much of anything except staring as I passed. His clothes were dusty and torn, a backpack slung over one shoulder. His face, I can't describe it. Not because I don't remember, but because it didn't seem to belong. Like trying to recall a dream that slips away the harder you grasp it. I didn't stop. You don't stop for strangers in the middle of nowhere. Any trucker knows that. But a mile down the road, there he was again. Same stance, same stare, same empty expression. I slammed the brakes, my rig groaning in protest. I hadn't passed him. I was sure of it. My heart pounded as I leaned forward, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This time he moved. He raised a hand, a slow wave, like he knew me. "Need a lift?" The voice again. But this time, I saw his lips move. I floored it. The truck lurched forward, roaring down the highway. I didn't care about speed limits or way stations. All I wanted was distance between me and whatever that was. The GPS recalculated again, showing a long stretch of road without any markers. Number 2, 37, no nothing. I told myself I was safe. Then the CB crackled to life. "Tom?" My name, plain as day, spoken in that same calm voice. I grabbed the mic, my hand shaking. "Who the hell is this?" "Look behind you." I didn't. The urge to check my mirrors was unbearable, but I kept my eyes on the road. The cab felt smaller, the air heavier. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if something had climbed into the truck with me. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. A light appeared in the distance, a gas station glowing like a beacon. Relief flooded through me. I pulled in fast, the tires crunching over gravel as I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights. The place was empty except for a single clerk behind the counter. I stumbled inside, my legs feeling like jelly. "You okay, man?" the clerk asked, eyeing me warily. "Yeah," I lied, grabbing a bottle of water. My throat was dry, my hands shaking as I twisted off the cap. I stayed inside longer than I needed to, taking comfort in the normalcy of the buzzing lights and the hum of the coolers. When I finally stepped back outside, my rig was gone. The lot was empty. No truck, no trailer, no sign it had ever been there. Panic rose in my chest. I spun in circles, scanning the darkness beyond the lights. My keys were still in my pocket. The truck couldn't have just vanished. Then I saw it, parked just beyond the edge of the gas station's glow, barely visible in the shadows. I didn't want to walk toward it, but I didn't have a choice. The truck door was open, swinging gently in the breeze. I climbed into the cab, my breath catching in my throat. There was someone sitting in the passenger seat. It was the man from the road. He didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead, his hands resting calmly on his knees. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I thought about jumping out, running back to the gas station, but my body wouldn't move. Finally, he turned his head, his face still blurry, unreal. "You can't leave," he said. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, it was daylight, and I was parked at a rest stop, miles from where I'd been. The truck was fine, the load intact, but I felt wrong, like a part of me was still back there, on that stretch of road. I haven't driven since. Every night I dream of mile marker, 237, of that man's face, or lack of one. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it was a hallucination from too many sleepless nights. But if you ever find yourself out there in the middle of nowhere and you see that sign, keep driving. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't look behind you. I didn't think it was going to be anything out of the ordinary. A simple long-haul route to the next state, a few hours of driving with my thoughts and the hum of the truck's engine to keep me company. I've been a truck driver for over 10 years now, and I've seen it all. Dark highways, the occasional weird encounter at a rest stop, the kind of things that make you shrug it off and keep moving. But this time was different. I had just left a small town in the middle of nowhere, somewhere off the 95. There was a light drizzle in the air, the kind of rain that gives everything a slightly washed out look. The highway stretched ahead, barely any cars around. It's the perfect time to think, reflect, get lost in the rhythm of the road. The truck's headlights cast long beams of light that sliced through the darkness, revealing stretches of empty road and the occasional silhouette of a tree or fence post. But then, somewhere along the way, it happened. I was driving past an old gas station when I noticed something odd. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow that looked a little too much like a person standing near the pumps. But no. I looked again, and the figure was still there. A man, dressed in a thick coat despite the mild weather, standing absolutely still, staring right at me. I couldn't tell if he was even breathing. I should have kept going. It was late, and I had miles to cover. But something about the way he was standing, how he didn't move at all, made my stomach tighten. Maybe it was the loneliness of the open road. Or maybe I just hadn't seen a living soul in hours. But I slowed down. I pulled over to the side, my truck's engine rumbling as I cut the ignition. I stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting at my face. "Hey!" I called, half expecting the guy to step forward and explain that he was stranded or needed help. Instead, he just stood there, silent. I walked closer, my boots clicking against the asphalt. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. There was something about him, his stiff posture, the way his eyes were locked on me, that was off. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice louder this time. The man didn't respond. He didn't even move. I took another step. Something in my gut was telling me to leave, to just get back in the truck and drive off like nothing happened. But I couldn't bring myself to. I was too close now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man blinked. Just once. And then slowly, he opened his mouth. I thought he was going to speak. But instead, the sound that came out wasn't a voice at all. It was a low, guttural groan, like something trying to escape but getting stuck. I stepped back, heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? Before I could react, the man turned, as if on cue, and walked away, disappearing behind the dilapidated gas station building. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of dread that was crawling under my skin. I glanced back at the road, and after a long breath, I climbed back into the truck and drove off. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just some trick of the mind, the isolation, the fatigue. But then, the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it. I wasn't even close enough to hit the dial. And yet, there it was. A voice on the static. "Help me," it said. The voice was faint, desperate, like it was coming from far away. "Please help me." I froze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could feel the blood rushing to my fingertips. I looked at the radio, then back at the road. The static had faded. It was just the hum of the engine again. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just the radio, a malfunction, something explainable, but I couldn't. Not after what had just happened. I decided to take the next exit. I needed a break, some rest, a moment to clear my head. The truck stop ahead was small, barely more than a diner, and a few parking spaces. I parked in a corner, away from the few other trucks that were there, and got out. The night air was crisp, a little colder than I expected. As I approached the diner, I saw a few truckers sitting inside, sipping coffee, talking in low voices. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. "Another late night, huh?" one of the truckers said, looking up from his coffee. "You driving far?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just heading down south." "Well, don't stay out too long, kid. This road can mess with your head." I nodded, taking a seat at the counter. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted a moment of peace, a brief respite from the creeping unease that had settled in my chest. As I drank the coffee, trying to settle my nerves, I glanced at the small television hanging in the corner. The news anchor was talking about some missing persons cases, but it was the name of one of the victims that caught my attention. A man had gone missing a few days ago, not far from where I had been earlier, near that old gas station. The name? It was familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. The man I had seen, the figure, the one who stood in front of the pumps. I tried to shake it off, but my hands were shaking as I set the coffee cup down. The waitress noticed, but said nothing. "Everything all right, sugar?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But I wasn't tired. My brain was buzzing. Something about the missing man. It felt too real, like I was connected to it somehow. I paid for the coffee and left the diner, stepping back into the cold night air. My truck sat there, just as I had left it. But when I reached the door, something was wrong. The door handle was slick, as though someone had been touching it. I didn't know why that felt wrong, but it did. I glanced around, but the lot was empty, save for a few trucks further down. I started the truck, my breath fogging up the window as I pulled away. The road stretched out in front of me again, and I tried to focus on the horizon. Then the radio crackled again. "Please," the voice begged, clearer this time. "You have to help me." I slammed my hand on the off switch, but the voice didn't stop. It kept talking, kept begging. It kept repeating the same thing, over and over. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me, a shadow, a figure, but nothing, only the road behind me. I was shaking now. My heart was thumping in my chest. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I gripped the wheel, my mind spiraling. The voice continued. You have to help me, or it will come for you. And then I saw it, the shadow in the distance, at the edge of the highway, the figure from earlier. It was standing there just as still as before. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were others. Behind it, emerging from the darkness, dozens of them, standing still in the rain, watching me. I couldn't breathe. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I knew they were following me.